great to follow Bill, especially. I have one slide on precision medicine, so he did a phenomenal introduction to it, and you'll see I kind of lead to how important this is in talking about mobile health and where it's going to go. And Vivek was nice enough to give me this opportunity to kind of talk about it in a general sense and in healthcare systems. And for many of you in healthcare systems, you may recognize it's really not in healthcare systems yet. And so a lot of what I'm going to talk about is, okay, what are the challenges? Why haven't we gotten there yet? And then what are the promises for that? So I just want to list my conflicts of interest. Importantly, we are funded by Qualcomm, which obviously has a vested interest in selling as many mobile devices as we possibly can. I hope that doesn't influence us. And then several companies who haven't looked at my track record of my being a medical advisor is usually a kiss of death for that company. But there are several that one I'll show a picture of that die in a sense, but I'm not going to talk about them otherwise. So let's start with just ground zero kind of definition of mobile health. This is the NIH consensus group's definition. So mHealth is the use of mobile or wireless devices to improve health outcomes, healthcare services, and health research. So a very broad and I think very accurate definition. But I think when a lot of people think of mHealth, what they're thinking of is the many sensors, and particularly wearable sensors in different ways, but the broad range of these mobile sensors. And I think that's a hugely important enabler. This is just a figure from a review article talking about mobile health, and it's meant to just show that virtually every organ system, every disease state, there is some sensor. Some of them are great, some of them are not so great, but there's a lot of capabilities, and what is not so great today is going to likely be great a year from now if there's more need. So it's this incredibly rapidly expanding ecosystem that's going to give us opportunities we've never had before. And that's why if you look at different predictions of what mHealth is going to mean in the future, whether it's from a business standpoint where they're predicting here a six-fold growth in wearable sensor technology sales. This is an article from The Economist looking at the revenue that comes from mobile health and its prediction comparing 2013 to 2018. And so there's this view that mobile health is just going to explode, that there's going to be an incredible array of sensors. There's going to be an incredible uptake of these and using within healthcare systems. What's challenging from all of our standpoints who are in research in the area of looking at this and studying and figuring out where mobile health fits in, if you look at three of the most recent review articles, systematic reviews of mobile health, you see all three of them conclude essentially the same thing, that there's not enough data to say there's any benefit of any of these technologies, or at least the implementation of any of these technologies. So obviously there's some, the technologies, many of them work, many of them don't, but the good ones, the ones that work are amazing, but for some reason we haven't yet been able to show that can impact care, that can impact outcomes. And that is really, I think, one of the challenges to incorporating this into healthcare. And there are others I'll mention too. And so I always think by showing a Steve Jobs quote, it gives me immediate credibility as being an innovative and out-of-the-box thinker. But I do think that this is really a key quote, and that we don't think of enough when we think of mobile health, because a lot of technologies are being developed to mimic what we do within healthcare systems already today. They're not really beginning at saying, okay, what do the users of these technologies really want? What's going to be really beneficial to them? And I think that when you think about this, and when you think about the projects that you're developing, you really need to think about, am I just trying to mimic what we do already in the healthcare system, but do it in a fancier way with a smartphone involved? Or am I really addressing an unmet need that we really understand from patients or from users? A lot of the technologies are kind of built around this quantified self idea. And part of that is driven by the finances of it. Venture capitalists say, we want to sell this stuff right away. So who's the market? Well, anybody who is a quantified selfer. Usually shown to be these smiling athletes, like, oh, good, I get to know everything about myself, or this real weekend warrior, future Olympiad, I'm sure, Olympian, who's measuring everything on themselves, or this just kind of weird alien-like picture of, but we're just dying to have all of our information, and that's all we need. And so the big problem in healthcare, and the whole reason we're all too fat and we don't exercise enough and we're stressed out, is because we don't have enough information to tell us that we are. But when you look at it, and all of you laugh because of course that doesn't make sense, but that's really in many ways what we're doing and what we've done in some really good studies. So this is a very nice study that I really like because it just reinforced what I believed already. So therefore you show it even if it's not very good. But this was it was a small interview study where they, if I remember right, they talked to a little bit over 20 patients and asked them about their getting their data. And I had a patient tell me ages ago when I was just out of internal medicine residency, and he was a youngish diabetic who's in his 30s, and I was giving him a hard time for not checking his finger sticks, and he said, I don't like being reminded I'm sick. And that's something that's always stuck with me. So we assume that if we give everybody their information, that's, oh, okay, thank you. Now I know better I am. But the headline or the title of this paper, I think, really resonates, and it highlights the main finding from this, is that a lot of personal data collection reminded people that they were sick. And that was a barrier to people wanting to use this. And so this is from their conclusion of the authors. The developers of consumer health information technologies often assume that a wide variety of patients will have unlimited enthusiasm for tracking their own health data. But what they found is that, and I should have mentioned, these patients are individuals with multiple chronic conditions, that first they consider it work to track their own data. So it's not just a passive kind of fun thing for them to do. Most importantly, they found the data can be emotionally charged. So they felt that the data, whether good or bad, created emotional distress for many of the time. And then the final thing, and this is another problem with healthcare systems and from the provider standpoint, is that they perceive, and I think the patients perceived, and I think appropriately, that providers don't welcome that kind of information. When we're always weary about information, whether it be blood pressure, maybe less so glucose because we're used to it, but any information that's gathered outside the typical snapshot of a doctor's appointment, we are a little bit distrustful of. And so they recognize this. And you say, okay, well, these are people who already have multiple chronic conditions. Maybe they're not enthusiastic. But there are a couple of studies that I think do a really good job of really showing what it can do. When we go back to the first kind of mHealth technology was home glucose monitoring. And that's been around since the late 1970s. And there have actually been 2 studies, at least that I'm aware of, that have looked at more frequent glucose monitoring with the goal being, can we improve diabetic control or control in diabetes, patients with diabetes with increased monitoring. And so this is a smaller study, 184 individuals, brand new diagnosed type 2 diabetes, who were randomized to either self-monitor or no monitoring for a year. Because in individuals who aren't taking insulin, there's no strong proof that home monitoring actually improves outcomes from a population level and there's other issues. But what they found, very interestingly, that there was not only no improvement in glycemic control, but that the monitoring was associated with higher scores on depression subscales. So essentially that the increased monitoring led to higher levels of depression, but didn't improve the outcomes, or at least the surrogate for outcomes in this population. The second study was observational, looked at self-monitoring of blood glucose in almost 3,000 individuals with type 2 diabetes, and it's associated with metabolic control and quality of life. And what they found, again, in the patients not treated with insulin, where there is good evidence that monitoring makes a difference and you're going to act on it, that self-monitoring was associated with worse control, so actually higher levels of hemoglobin A1C and a greater psychological burden. And we don't think of that, so in diabetes populations, because home glucose testing has been around forever, we just kind of are used to that and say, oh, that's the way it is. But when you think about it, and now we'll be able to do the same thing with high blood pressure, be able to do the same thing with heart failure, with asthma, with COPD, we'll have all these metrics we can measure. We have to step back and think, okay, well, why won't people feel the same way about this frequent measuring of these other physiological parameters as patients with diabetes have done in these studies of more frequent measuring of glucose? And it doesn't just end in disease state. So one of the big promises, I think, of mobile technology, and for all of you who own Fitbits or something like it, is the wellness aspect, right? We can finally get people walking and being more active, doing more work. This was a really nice study. I think it was done at Duke, but despite that, it was still a good study. And I have North Carolina affiliations. All right, so this was a study. I really like these economic studies where they can fool the participants and tell them something that's not true. So 100 students were given pedometers. They were told they were studying the comfort of wearing it. So 1/3 had it taped shut. They were just wearing the pedometer, couldn't see anything, just walked around as usual. Another third was asked to check their steps several times a day. So they were actively encouraged to take measurements, see how the steps were doing, what they were. And then the third group was told they could look at the steps, but it really wasn't important. They could do whatever they want. Now, most of you would predict, and rightfully so, that those who could measure their steps actually increased their step count and significantly compared to the control group that was just had its taped shut. So that from a Fitbit commercial standpoint would go, woohoo, okay, by monitoring your steps, we can make you walk more. The other thing that's really interesting they looked at is kind of looking at enjoyment of walking. And maybe at least surprising to me or interesting to me was that in the groups that could measure it, they decreased their enjoyment of walking. So they no longer enjoyed it as much because now it was more work and more of a task to do it, and it was no longer fun. So, you know, again, you'll never see this on a Fitbit commercial and say, hey, walk more, but hate it while you're doing it. But this kind of, you know, rolled over into overall satisfaction. So they looked, again, it's a small 100-person study, but it's the biggest one we have in looking at stuff like this. So that measurement made people feel more like walking was work. And it overall decreased just the overall mood for the people who are walking, decreased happiness and satisfaction. Again, small study, maybe a fluke finding, but these are important things that we never think about when we develop these really cool mHealth devices and say, oh, look, you can measure all this stuff, things are going to be great, and we don't think about. And this is really important, and Bill's talking about precision medicine and how we're going to do this, and we have to be really cognizant of this when we're trying to figure out not only how we're going to do this within healthcare systems, but also within the Precision Medicine Initiative, which I believe will be that example to healthcare systems in the future. The compliance with these is probably follows along the idea that people don't like doing this. This is another very small study, another one out of Duke. Yeah, Duke. So they just looked at 3 healthy individuals and 3 chronically ill individuals. They gave them 4 different devices and 1 app that could measure 11 different parameters altogether. And they asked them to measure it on a weekly basis for only, if I remember right, it's 1 month. A very short period of time. The healthy people were pretty good. About 3/4 of the time they did the measurements they needed to in the 3 healthy. For the people with chronic conditions, 16% actually monitored, were compliant on a weekly basis for a very short period of time, for that 4-week period of time of monitoring their technology. And this might seem really obvious to people, but we've been involved in studies in COPD where the sponsors wanted to have, oh, we'll just give them their spirometer and their pulse oximeter and their blood pressure monitor and their glucometer, and we'll ask them to measure it 3 times a day, and we'll send that information in, and everybody will be happy. And there's some really challenges to that. Bill mentioned one of my favorite research programs in general right now is the Research Kit program. Bill mentioned it in some of the work we'll do in PMI and Sage Bionetworks, who developed this is the Empower app in Parkinson's disease. They're one of our partners in PMI, and they're going to be developing sensors in this group too. And one of the great things about them, they're very open science. They share all their data. Anybody who wants to look at this Parkinson's data from Empower is available. Any researcher is allowed to do that. And so it's a very nice test where they measure several things and they leave it up to the participants what they'd like to do. They'll do some spatial memory testing. They'll do some tap testing that Bill mentioned. They prompt the user to say ah into the phone. That for those of you who know neurodegenerative disease is much better than I, it can be a marker for progression of Parkinson's. So very straightforward, very nice kind of group setting. There were almost 50,000 people downloaded the app. This is at the time of a publication, maybe 4 months ago. So very, really rapid uptake into a study. Of those almost 50,000, only 16,000 consented. And then people are allowed, and we think we'll do this in PMI too, kind of to consent. I just want to keep this specific to one program, to this PMI, to PMI investigators, or I want to broadly share all my data, de-identified data, and let everybody take advantage of it. And so the majority of people consented for use their data broadly, but then only less than 10% of those individuals who agreed to this broad sharing data used the device on 5 separate days over the first 6 months. And even of those individuals who used it at least 5 days, so this is you're starting out with 48,000 people who said, oh, this app looks interesting, down to 800, a little bit less than 900 people who actually used it 5 times. And then you can see how rapidly that drops off over time. So this is the dilemma we face within healthcare systems, and saying, okay, how do we implement things that people will continue to use them? So here's a very motivated group that no one was twisting their arm to be part of it. These are people who are very interested in being part of a Parkinson's study. And then we look at that because Scripps were lucky enough to have that participant engagement technology arm. So I look at this and go, holy moly, how are we going to get people to stay engaged, not only for a few weeks, but how are we going to get them to stay engaged for a few decades? And the nice thing of many nice things at PMI is no one knows the answer, so we'll all figure it out together. So what I'd say is that mobile health technologies alone are unlikely to engage individuals in their care. So they're cool technologies, but if no one uses them, and then they're not really very helpful. The way I'd like to think about it, or have all of you think about this, is more that these mobile technologies, that if we take advantage of the unique capabilities they bring, that we can develop brand new systems of care that can completely transform health management, wellness promotion, and I'd also say medical research. And so I use the term digital medicine, or we use the term digital medicine. That's kind of more encompassing, even though they kind of mean it's a little bit semantics. But when we think of digital medicine, we think of kind of the broad solution. It's really the convergence of these smartphone-enabled mobile computational and connectivity capabilities, other wireless sensors that are connected through that, include genomics, although I'm not talking about genomics, use information systems, cloud computing, machine learning, and you use all of these, a digital solution as opposed to a single individual sensor or single individual app, but a broad digital solution to address the problems that healthcare systems have and we have in healthcare. And I'll just give one example of a disease state of what the differences could be. I'm going to use hypertension because most people don't appreciate the high blood pressure is actually the single greatest contributor to morbidity and mortality worldwide today. And I like using this as an example because we've been able to measure high blood pressure by using a blood pressure cuff or some measure for well over 120 years. We have very effective pharmaceutical agents to treat hypertension that have been available since, let's say, 1940s, but really now medications that are less than pennies a day. So it's not a financial barrier to get to treat that. But despite over a century of capabilities of measurement and half a century of capabilities to treat, it's still the #1 killer or risk factor contributor to morbidity and mortality worldwide today. Beyond that, it affects 1 in 3 American adults. It is the single most common reason for a primary care visit in the United States. And then despite this and over $100 billion being spent on it, that only half the individuals in the United States who have high blood pressure have it adequately controlled. It's 20% worldwide. And 3 or 4 months ago was a paper out of China. It's 4% in China. So we have a long, long ways to go and a lot of capabilities. Well, because of that, there's a lot of really cool mHealth technologies being developed to measure blood pressure. The caretaker device up there is actually FDA approved. It's one of 2 continuous non-cuffed blood pressure monitoring devices that have FDA approval, but the 2 are limited only to the inpatient setting. But the caretaker devices, which I think is really poorly named, by the way, but it's the closest to something you'd use in the home. Withings just released a scale called the Body Cardio that measures pulse wave velocity just as you step on it. So it's kind of a surrogate for blood pressure. The Scanner Scout has been developed for a while. It's one of the X Prize entrants of the Tricorder X Prize. You hold it against your forehead and measures blood pressure. This heel mat is a globe, as you can see, that you hold in both your hands and measures your blood pressure. Bold Diagnostics is developing a wristband, as long as several others, to measure blood pressure. And then there's the DynoSense device that you hold in your mouth and measures your blood pressure. All of it without using a cup, all very easy. The Bold Diagnostics, and there are several others like it that are aiming for continuous blood pressure monitoring while you're ambulating, but a lot of really cool mHealth technologies that none yet FDA approved or regulatory approved for outside the inpatient setting, but we're getting there and we'll be very close. So these are really cool mHealth solutions that can help hypertension, but none of them, I believe, in and of itself is going to make any kind of a dent into the problem of hypertension and its impact on morbidity and mortality. But if you look at it as more of a digital medicine solution, so this is a picture of a Qantas watch, which sums up very nicely the whole mHealth field. Had over $20 million in venture capital backing. It's a watch that measures blood pressure continuously and other cool stuff, and ended up folding and was actually, their IP was bought by Apple. So hopefully that it's good enough IP will eventually come out. But let's assume somewhere in the future we have this technology or any technology that can measure blood pressure. That information is going to go to your smartphone. Hopefully somewhere in the background in there, you also have your DNA information. Within your smartphone, you're also going to be able to passively collect a lot of other information: sleep, diet, activity, stress, medications, several other things. Most of them as passively as possible, possibly by just carrying your smartphone with you. But those will get easier and better. Those then can go in any one of several different AI clusters, cloud-based clusters, to make sense of all this and make sense of it entirely around you. How does your sleep affect your blood pressure? How does stress affect your blood pressure? All of these things, and then that can feed that information back to you in one of several ways. These are 4 different virtual assistants that are built on an AI platform. They're really designed to be kind of a computerized medical information source for you that eventually will be designed to take your information and then give you useful personalized feedback around it. There are also devices. This is the Amazon Echo. I'm showing you purely because my son works for Amazon, so I highly encourage everybody to buy one now. Because this is an interactive platform where you can, instead of getting printed out information on your smartphone, you can actually get verbal feedback on, hey, you should meditate because your blood pressure is sky high. You can do things, but you can take the information, most importantly, and feed it back to you in a way that's useful, in a way you desire. There's this super freaky robot that to me always looks like Hillary Clinton when I look at it. But this is Sophie, that is like a humanoid robotic form of Siri and Alexis, and that can speak to you and talk. And so at some point we can even have these robotic assistants, or if you really want to go old school, you can let the information go to your doctor and get feedback from your doctor. But this is what a solution for hypertension is, that healthcare systems have to look at, as opposed to just saying, oh, we have this cool watch, or we have this cool device, and these are cool watches and cool devices, but to really be a solution, to really meet the needs of what the users of these need, you really have to have a full-on solution. And it isn't only for hypertension. You can do the same things for wellness, diabetes, there's hypertension, home diagnostics for acute illnesses, respiratory issues, all can be fed into a personalized feedback mechanism, whatever works best for you. The back end in the healthcare systems, they can have these dashboards that potentially follow you where it's necessary and not in places where it isn't, and have a team of individuals that's backed up by strong artificial intelligence capabilities and learning healthcare systems that can make all that happen. So it seems in concept very straightforward, and at least the engineering mind in me says, oh, we just have to design that. Well, one of the big barriers, and I'll show another quote, and I apologize for this one, but I like it. So this is Rick Scott, who as a politician wouldn't necessarily lead any credibility to what he has to say, but he also was the founder of what is now the largest healthcare, for-profit healthcare system, the Columbia HCA system. And so he understands healthcare, and I think it's really true. And where you look at, okay, what is the barriers to using mobile health and digital medicine solutions within healthcare systems, I think this sums up really well. And so how many businesses do you know that want to cut their revenue in half? That's why the healthcare systems won't change healthcare systems. And I think that is, even in ones like Kaiser's, which are maybe in the best position to do something innovative, where it's not going to impact their revenues only positively, there are other barriers to these major changes, because these are disruptive changes. They aren't minor little tweaks of adding something into what's currently done, but it's really completely redesigning care. And that's why many analysts and people looking into the future are saying, okay, who is going to really disrupt this industry? So the title of this is Healthcare's New Interest, Who Will Be the Industry's Amazon.com? And they're saying that the U.S. healthcare is going to be disrupted by companies that are tuned to the needs and desires of empowered consumers. And I would say not even necessarily empowered consumers, even though consumers can get more and more empowered, but just consumers who now are being forced to pay more out of pocket, who are more outspoken about the inconvenience of the typical healthcare approach to come see the doctor's office every 6 months, whether you need it or not. And that's why some of the biggest tech companies in the world are now have a major focus on healthcare. Google now, their life sciences, which is now Verily, IBM Watson, Samsung, Microsoft, and Apple all have a very strong presence in healthcare. And that is very telling, that they're seeing this gap and they're trying to address this gap. And how it's actually going to happen, we have a lot to learn still. So my last Steve Jobs quote in my last slides, it's so even though I said, yeah, you have to go to the consumer, but there's also truth to this, is that a lot of times people don't know what they want until you show it to them. So that I think in these mobile health, digital medicine solutions of healthcare systems, we can't just go ask somebody, okay, what is it you'd like? We have to be clever enough to design systems with keeping the user in mind, and then try it out on them. And we have to think in a really different, re-engineered, disruptive, any adjective you want to use that is very Silicon Valley-ish, to talk about, really think of this differently. And what I like to tell our team when we're designing something is that pretend there's never been healthcare before. Just ignore how healthcare is provided now and just start from the ground up and redesign it, and think about how would you do it today, knowing everything we know about health and wellness, knowing everything we know about wearable sensors, digital technologies, artificial intelligence. How would you design it brand new from the ground up, ignoring historical precedents? And I think it would be very different than what we're doing. And I'll follow up for what on Bill's excellent introduction to this, and saying the Precision Medicine Initiative, I think, is a way to serve as that model to show consumers what it is that may work in healthcare. And that's, to me, one of the many exciting things about PMI. When President Obama announced it, he announced this isn't just a huge research program. This is actually also designed to be a model for the way healthcare can be provided in the future, where we can monitor individuals in their own home during real life, be able to provide them feedback in a private, secure, personalized manner that allows them to make better choices around their health, that stays on top of their conditions, maybe diagnoses things sooner. That is the promise of PMI, and it's a multi-decade program. It is, I think Bill mentioned, the data is going to be open for everybody. This is a platform for everybody, not just the people lucky enough to get the grants who will be criticized in years to come for doing a crappy job. But really, for everybody to use as a resource to answer a lot of questions that need to be answered. So in conclusion, mHealth technologies, they have tremendous potential to transform how health is managed. Implementing mHealth technologies has proven to be especially challenging in existing healthcare systems. And I mentioned why I think that's because we're just trying to kind of shoehorn them into the existing healthcare systems without thinking of consumers. And then finally, comprehensive digital medicine systems of care are required to provide the truly disruptive solutions needed that completely transform how we manage health. And I've always said health, but also healthcare research. Everything fits in that. And then finally, as a shameless plug, in the next several months, we'll be launching Nature Partner Journal Digital Medicine. So the Nature Journal system recognizes there's a gap in digital medicine. We'd like to think it's high-tiered digital medicine publications, or it's very difficult to find them. They're often spread in many ways. All of you are the future of mHealth, so look for When you've got that groundbreaking Nobel Prize winning research paper in the future, think of the Nature Digital Medicine. Thank you very much.